This conference will now be recorded.
Hi, everyone. I'm Liz Luke. I'm the Student Committee Advisor. We are so excited for our first student forum. We're going to try to put on like a forum or a series every month on just different nutrition topics. So everyone that's here tonight, any feedback that you have or that if you find helpful or that you want to hear, let us know. The Student Committee, I'll have you guys wave so you can introduce yourselves. Chelsea Schaefer's on the committee, Ross Shumway, Adria Butler, and Michelle Moreau. She can't make it right now, but she might be coming on soon. But we're the student committee, and Beth McCall is on the board, and she oversees the student committee too. So we're really excited for this event. And our first guest, we have Jessica Isaacs with us, UCLA performance basketball dietitian, and she's going to be talking all about breaking into sports nutrition. So how this is going to work is we're going to, as a student committee, ask Jessica from Instagram all the questions that everyone sent in. And then after that, it's really just a Q&A. Anything that you want to ask Jessica, it's really casual. If you want to put on your camera, it's great. If not, no worries. But hopefully you will learn a lot today and just kind of have more context through this. So we're just going to start off with Jessica. Can you just take us through your career path, just where you started and where you are today?
Yeah, this feels like the intro to Sports RD Snippets here. Where you started to work
It's just, I can't help it.
I love it. I love it. Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to be talking to you. I didn't realize this was the first one. Gosh, that makes me like a little nervous now. Yeah, so I got into dietetics. So my journey was kind of, an unusual route. I'm a second career dietitian. I started off in the military right out of high school. I was in the Air Force as an aircraft mechanic, so nothing at all to do with nutrition. But I struggled with an eating disorder for about 10, 15 years of my life. And then through that period of recovery, really realizing, I needed to do something. I had a young daughter at the time who was making some comments about her own body, and was really seeing just kind of what I was dealing with and how that was transferring over to my daughter. And so I knew I had to make a change. And so I started going on my path of recovery. Through that, really discovered fitness. Was never an athlete growing up, always like aspired to be, but just never really worked out. So just really seeing kind of the healing power of nutrition and seeing what it could do for performance. I really got interested in, what is it like to work with the highest level of athletes and really help them understand, first of all, how to navigate away from diet culture and nutrition misinformation and all the stuff that I had kind of fallen into throughout my life. But then also, to understand how to fuel optimally to do all the incredible things that athletes do. And so I didn't know what a dietitian was at the time, but just through my research discovered that that's what you needed to do in order to do this kind of work. So I did my undergrad at Purdue University. I was like almost 30 by the time I was going through my nutrition classes. I was going into nursing at first, and then I decided to do graphic design for a little bit. And so once I decided I wanted to do nutrition, Purdue was my first brick and mortar school, and so I did the last 2 years there of my nutrition requirements. And during that time, we have an incredible director of sports dietitian there, Lauren Link. If you guys are involved in CPSDA, you've probably heard the name. So she was my mentor. I started off just working at the fueling station, volunteering, mostly at the football fueling station, just stocking things, making smoothies, all the work that you guys are probably doing if you're interning at your locations. But I wanted to do more. And so, I was working really hard, and I think, checking all the boxes that Laura needed to see for then when I went to her and asked, what else can I do? Can I do more work? Can I see some other aspects of collegiate dietetics? And so I started interning for about 15 to 20 hours a week under Lauren, and I got to do some different things than just run the fueling station, making nutrition education materials for athletes. And that was a big one that I was really doing a lot of. And that's really helped me, I think, later on down the road with a lot of my nutrition education stuff that I put out, is just kind of that relationship and how she mentored me there on how to take all this information, sciencey stuff that we know and translate that into little bite-sized pieces that athletes can understand and that people can really understand and connect with. So that was Purdue. Did my dietetic internship. I did a distance program, Wellness Work Days. You guys have probably heard of it. They had a sports nutrition and entrepreneurship pathway, but that actually wasn't available quite yet when I was looking at the internship. So I did the worksite wellness one. I was able to get a sports med, like a week in a sports med office as an elective rotation. But really my internship, I didn't really do much sports stuff at all. And so then when it came time to find a job, I was kind of moving around. We moved to Virginia, we being my family. And there wasn't any sports jobs or any jobs that I was really qualified for as an entry-level dietitian. And so I took a clinical job, and I'm totally glad that I did. I do think clinical is a wonderful foundation as a sports dietitian. So if you're not able to get into the field right away, like, take advantage of what you can learn there. M&T is something we do all the time as sports dietitians. We have type 1 diabetics. We have people with GI issues. We have all sorts of different things that we're going to see. And so having that complementary skill set of the M&T background is super helpful. So I did that for a little bit, and had some life stuff go on, just kind of like a marriage ending and life feeling like it was imploding. And so I decided to move to California from Virginia. I took a temporary contract. It was like a 4-week job, and I really had no idea what I was going to do beyond that. It was at a skilled nursing facility. Was definitely not an area that I wanted to work, but I was at the time, I just needed to kind of like hit reset on my life a little bit. So I took that job and was super, super stressed out about what was going to be next for me. Was looking at like private practice work. But then I had a call from a connection that I had built through coming to CPSDA conferences, being involved in feedback there. I'm sorry, whoever that is that's actually, if you can mute. Through CPSDA had hit me up and let me know that there was an opportunity that was coming available at Mamba Sports Academy. The chiropractor was for, so the dietitian I knew was for the LA Rams. The chiropractor was the one for the LA Rams as well. They were looking for a new dietitian at the Mamba Sports Academy, which was Kobe Bryant's training facility. And so that really panned out, took a role there, was very much a private practice kind of a job. So even though I was in a, it was like a sports performance training facility, so you've got athletic training, you've got sports performance coaches, you've got skill specifics coaches. They had cognition lab in there. There was even an esports facility, a whole recovery suite, really cool facility. But it was very much like a private practice kind of a job, and very different than what I was expecting from having a collegiate experience, you know, where you're supporting a team and you're providing whatever services the athlete needs. Well, here it was more of a business. And so that was an interesting thing for, you know, not having a business background or really understanding how business works to kind of fall into that role. But it was a great opportunity. Met some cool people, had some really cool opportunities that came about there. Kobe had like a pro invitational with some just big names in the NBA, and I got to help support that training camp and some other NFL pre-combine training programs, NBA pre-draft programs that they were having, and just got to do some cool things. And then COVID hit. After Kobe passed, and it was kind of just like a wham bam for the academy, and people started being let go, and I was one of those, unfortunately. And so I was like sitting here in COVID time. It was, I think, August last year, and was like, what am I going to do? I really didn't want to start just doing a private practice only, but I just kind of poured into that. This was the time where I started just doing a lot more on social media. I built like a sports nutrition course, and just trying to do different things to try to capture that athlete audience that I was looking for. And fortunately, I got a phone call for a job at UCLA because I really, really wasn't ready to do full-time private practice work. And so that's where I'm at now, working with the men's and women's basketball teams. It's a really cool position. I think the positions are now growing. Other schools, I've been getting phone calls from people saying that they're getting more basketball specific jobs, but I think at the time there was only one other person that worked just basketball in all of the collegiate settings. And so with that, I have like 30 athletes, and with 30 athletes, I can really do a lot of individualized care and support. Having a nice budget, as if you guys have worked in sports, can maybe be able to relate to, is having a nice budget means I can do a lot more things as well. But yeah, so I've been here since. And yeah, I think that's about my journey up until now.
Awesome. Chelsea, do you want to start with the first question?
Sure. So, Jessica, how did you switch mindsets from working in a clinical position to then working in sports? Because I'm sure the settings were really different.
Very different, very different. And I think, one of it was like, I always try to keep my foot in the door in sports. Like I knew that that was where I always was going to end up. And I might've had these detours along the way, but I knew like, I came into this field to work in sports. I'm going to work in sports one way or the other. And so it's very different, obviously. So when, I was at a skilled nursing facility where most of my patients didn't even talk back. So, having that, there's no education really. There's a lot of, you're dealing with interdisciplinary people and care providers like you would in a sports facility, but the pace is much different. The responsibilities are much different. The interaction is much different. So very, very different. So for me, I was listening to podcasts as much as I can. I was reading as much as I can. I was staying active in the forums and reading in the forums and just trying to stay in the sports world however I could. But that transition, yeah, it was very different. It went from, I think having that Mamba job in between helped me with the pace of then a collegiate setting, which is much faster than the Mamba job was for me. So that was kind of a nice buffer, I think, in between. But yeah, the mindset is going from, having these patients that you're maybe changing like softness of food for and thickness of fluids that they could swallow to now trying to teach an athlete how to eat and having to build buy-in. I think that's a different component too, is that buy-in piece you don't really need to have as much in a skilled nursing facility setting, but then having a buy-in piece, like athletes, like they want autonomy. And so you have to kind of, I think, really change up the way in which you're interacting with people, and then also the pacing. It's just a very, very different world.
Thank you.
Jessica, do you need to find an internship that has an emphasis on sports specifically, or could you get an internship elsewhere that might have relevant experience?
I think it's incredible if you can find one with sports nutrition. Like, why not have that emphasis if that's something that works for you financially, geographically, whatever the case may be. Like, why not do that if you can? But if not, no, certainly you don't need to. I didn't have a sports nutrition emphasis in mine. I do think like having a distance program or one where you're able to select your preceptors, select your rotation sites is a little bit more advantageous, and then finding that rotation perhaps that you can then put on a resume or have a little bit more experience in beyond what you would get in undergrad to do some direct work under a sports dietitian in some capacity. But that could look very different, and that doesn't even have to be part of your dietetic internship. That could be something that you do on the side. But if you have an elective rotation, which I think most programs do have some sort of elective rotation, that would be one where you could fill with a sports nutrition. So I think it'd be beneficial, but certainly not the only pathway.
Awesome, thank you.
Hi, I have a question. So, oftentimes, what you end up doing to gain nutrition experience is working at a fueling station somewhere. Aside from working at a fueling station, are there any other recommendations you have for gaining experience?
Sure. So I would say depending on where you're working, if you're looking at like collegiate or pro team, or if you're looking at like a training facility or private practice, it's all going to be very different what your job responsibilities are. And even college to college, dietitian to dietitian, your responsibilities may look very different. Like at UCLA, I do a lot of food service stuff. But some of the other dietitians do a lot more one-on-one counseling. So even though we're at the same facility, our roles look very different. I think that a lot of times that fuel station aspect of it is like frowned upon, like, oh, food service, gross. But I see food service as, it's a way that we fuel our athletes. And if you have the ability to kind of control that in any capacity, like, that's an important part. And so sometimes we stub our nose, especially if you're doing volunteer work and that's the job that you're stuck with. The little details matter. And doing a good job at those little things, whether it is making smoothies, whether it is stocking things, like those things matter, and people notice when you're doing good work there. But I would say some other stuff is, counseling, counseling is a skill, and I took a nutrition counseling class. It did not equip me or prepare me enough for actually counseling with athletes. And it just I think too, athletes today, their attention, and I think it's true in general, but I feel like people's attention spans are shrinking smaller and smaller and smaller. And so those opportunities that you're going to have to teach and interact with athletes, you have a smaller and smaller window, and you have to be more concise and deliberate in the things that you say and how you educate. So maybe taking additional classes or doing additional work in counseling, whether that is finding somebody, finding athletes that need some nutrition counseling that you can do some practice on, or finding some family members. Getting that counseling experience under your belt's huge. The nutrition education piece, whether that's developing materials or presenting, that's going to be a big component too. A lot of team talks involved and preparing team talks, learning how to take, again, all that information and drill that down into bite-sized pieces that your athletes can understand. And that might look like you think you're going to teach them, all of these things in a presentation, and really you just focus on sleep in one, just focus on sleep habits, or you just focus on what are we eating right before training. And so trying to figure out, getting that practice, I should say, of presenting in a concise way, and ensuring that the people that are receiving your message are understanding it. Those skills are important. Other skills, there's a lot of ordering and expense reports. I don't know how you practice that, but if you have opportunities, if there's a dietitian you're working under and you're doing good work and you want to ask for more responsibilities, certainly ask them about other things that they're doing and seeing if you can kind of gain some insight on that. Time management, priority management, those are skills I think you can certainly learn. And so if that's not a strong suit of yours, those are going to be important skills in this field. So I would say kind of all of those different things that are different elements of the job, not taking the fueling station duties for granted, and really, maybe using those as an opportunity to engage more with athletes instead of just providing them their fuel, but have a conversation with them and practice having those interactions with them. And then getting the counseling experience, and then more presentation experience probably would be some great ones.
Thank you.
Hi, I have a question. I'm also a career changer. I just started my master's program a couple weeks ago. Um, I feel like I relate to you in that I wasn't always an athlete. More recently, I got into fitness, but growing up, I wasn't amazing at sports and wasn't necessarily into it until more recently. One thing I'm wondering is, how important is it to have a background in the sport that you end up working in?
I think it's, again, a helpful piece. I think that if you have an athletic background, or you've been in the sport that you're working with athletes on, you can have an automatic in, and for that connection and buy-in piece, knowing that, especially if you competed at high level, I certainly think that's important. But I didn't have that experience. I picked up rugby in my 30s, and I did that, in part because I did want to be able to have those conversations and be able to relate in some capacity to them, that, I'm an athlete in some capacity. I think that there's a lot of other ways that you can build connection and rapport and buy-in with your athletes, that it's not necessary, but it helps to know the lingo, know the culture, understand all of those elements. So if there's this particular sport that you're interested in working with, or there's a role coming open that we're going to work with certain sports, learn about how many players are on the field, what are the positions, what does the season look like, that kind of information. I think that you can, I work with athletes across so many different sports in my private practice. I've never been a skeleton bobsled racer or anything close to that, but I've helped one. And I think if you know the main components, how to tailor something for a strength and power or team sport versus an endurance athlete. I think that as long as you can communicate and connect well, you can provide them something, a beneficial service, and work with them just fine.
Jessica, yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Michelle.
Perfect. So what are some ways, Jessica, to be a successful basketball sports RD when you're starting out?
Yeah, so I think I probably will sound like I'm on loop here, but connection and building relationships, I think is essential. For me, I came in, there had been a dietitian shortly before me, but I was more or less coming into building a program from scratch. And so when I got in, I really wanted to understand how things already worked, what people thought would be what my job was and my role was, how they thought I would be successful in the role and how they were evaluating my success. And so I didn't come in necessarily with my agenda. I knew in the back of my mind the things that I wanted to do, the things that I had seen done at other places that I wanted to bring to UCLA to basketball. But I really just worked first on building that connection and understanding how things work, understanding the key players, understanding, there's going to be, in my role, I am present with the athletes a lot, but a lot of times you're not going to be, as the dietitian, as present as the strength and conditioning coach, as the athletic trainer, and some other people that are going to be working with those athletes all day, every day. And they're going to have closer relationships. They're going to have conversations that you're not having. And so building relationships with the people that work around the athletes is essential as well. They need to be able to trust you so that when the athlete comes to them and says, X, Y, and Z that might have a nutrition related component, that they're going to send them to you or they're going to connect you in some way. So I think first is just understanding the program, understanding the culture, understanding the people that work around you, understanding what they're looking for. My women's basketball team was looking for anything and everything I wanted to do. There was trust there pretty quickly. They saw me as an expert in the area. They knew what a dietitian did and they were full support. Versus on the men's side, very different. They saw my role as strictly food service, just feed us. And it's evolved over time, but I first needed to meet them where they were at, which is just feed them. Just feed them. And then once I did that well, then I got the coach's ear a little bit more to be able to do some more things with them. So I think whatever role you're in, and if you, like on the Olympic side for the other sports dietitians I work with, they cover a number of teams and the relationship with each of the teams is very different. But the first thing is just really spending time, not just kind of like, we're so busy, right? We're so busy just running around all the time. I feel like I never sit down most days. But you got to spend time talking to people, got to spend time getting to know the people that work around you, what's going on in their lives, who they are, and building those relationships. As silly as that sounds, to just like sit and have conversations with people, it's an essential part of the job.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Awesome. Not to change the subject too much, but one of the last questions someone sent in from the Instagram, they said, how can I be as cool as her? But can you talk about maybe like, I mean, you can answer that, but maybe about like being yourself working as a sports dietitian, or just, I don't know. I think younger dietitians, you maybe feel like you can be yourself and a sports dietitian, but also like, I don't know, judgments of that too. So just speaking about that could be helpful.
Yeah, so I will like give a disclaimer here that like every culture of every school is going to be different, and what you can do. So like if you guys follow my social media, I do some fun stuff, and sometimes those are videos at work. I will say that won't fly everywhere. Not everywhere is going to be super interested in you having a social media presence or even allow you to do that sort of thing. So understand that first. But yeah, I think one thing that I've really done is, I was raised a certain way, and it was you bring this like uber professional self to work all the time. And certainly that might be the thing to do in some places and in some roles. That might be what they're looking for out of you. But I found that it was so disconnected from my authentic self. And so I was bringing a different person to work than who I truly was. And that disconnect for me was just really stressful. And I wasn't building the connections and relationships that I started to be able to build once I started to be more authentic, be more vulnerable, connect more with the people around me. I think when you are yourself, when you're not afraid to be a little silly, when you're not afraid to say, I don't know, when you're just yourself, it shows. And then when you're yourself, you can build connections with people a lot better. I feel like in school I was always told like your patient, your client is in the driver's seat, you don't talk about your own life, you don't relate to them. And I found that like doing that didn't really work for me. When I started to be more relatable, when I started to share some of like my struggles, when I started to share some of the things that I still struggle with when it comes to food and body and all of that sort of thing, that was driving a connection more with people. And that's going to look different for all of you. You're all very different people, but I do challenge you to be a little bit vulnerable, and then try to find ways that you can be yourself in a work setting. And yeah, I think that's a big piece for that I don't know, cool factor. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that was great. And I think too, like, you don't have to be like a sports dietitian to realize if you feel comfortable being a sports dietitian. Like, if you're a student interning somewhere, like, really pay attention to how you feel. Like, does this feel like an environment that I really see myself in? And like you said, like the fueling station, like maybe you're like, you really aren't, or it's not jiving with you, and maybe that's a sign. Or so just paying attention to what areas of sports nutrition that you maybe feel the most fulfilled about. Like, you don't have to love everything you do, but maybe just staying more curious might help you get through those times that you're like, I don't want to stock this fridge alone for like 3 hours or whatever.
Totally.
We can open up now to any student members that have any questions. Feel free to ask Jessica anything just that you want to ask.
Hi, I have a question. So, whenever you were talking about your career path, you talked about getting that phone call for these job opportunities. And I know a lot of sports nutrition is about networking and building those relationships. So, what advice do you have on building and maintaining those connections without being annoying, and like cold calling people? So, I don't know.
Yeah, I would say, like, doing stuff like this. Obviously, this is the student committee, but like, there's the annual boot camp. And that was actually where I made that connection that ended up being that job for Mamba through. So, it's not just going there, but like talking to people. And then maybe it's connecting with them either on social media or on LinkedIn, shooting them a message so that like you're showing that you're doing the things. The annual conference, I feel like, is even a better place to network. I think too, you have to go in knowing that these are sports dietitians that are coming there to learn, and maybe it's a break for them, and trying to navigate that piece of introducing yourself, but not being obnoxious. I think that we can figure that part out though. And then maybe it is connecting with them through social media. Not every dietitian is super present on social media. Not everybody's going to get back to you right away, and there's probably different degrees of people that prefer email or another way. But follow up. If you don't hear from somebody in a little bit and you're trying to connect with them, follow up. I think there's a certain point where you got to just kind of like move on. There's a lot of sports dietitians out there. I will say it is such a tight knit community though, that a lot of times when job opportunities become available, there's usually a text or a phone call that happens first before that job's ever posted. And so I would say, like, also, if you have a dietitian that you're interning under, doing really, really great work for that dietitian so that they can give you that referral. A lot of times people programs don't want to always take a risk on someone that no one's giving a recommendation for. So just, yeah, if you have the opportunities to work under a sports dietitian and they can actually see the work that you do and vouch for you, that's going to be huge. If you're in a place where you don't really have those kind of connections or opportunities, then that's where I would say it's even more important for you to either, come to these events or use the forum and try to not necessarily just kind of like, put something out there, but maybe responding to things that maybe you have some sort of like you can answer. For instance, like, people will ask for resources and materials all the time. Like, as an undergrad student, if I had made an infographic related to something that someone was looking for, I sent that out. And so even though I wasn't physically meeting those people, like, they were still seeing my name come across, and they were also seeing my work. So I think there's a lot of different ways that you can do it, but yeah, really, really emphasize that connection building in this field.
I think too, if you're
Awesome. Thank you so much.
I'm sorry, if you're really new and you're like struggling to like get your foot in the door and maybe you don't even have that sports nutrition experience, I forget, like, students are probably really nervous or thinking like no one's going to respond to you, and so you don't reach out to anyone because you're afraid. But I wouldn't be afraid to reach out. I think if you are, just be really specific on who you're reaching out to. Like, find something that that it shows that you're genuinely reaching out to them specifically, not that you're just trying to reach out to everyone. But if you're definitely like new to this and you're trying to get your foot in the door, like, don't be afraid to like message someone on LinkedIn. Just make sure you kind of research that person a bit so it's not kind of like a random email and has some purpose.
To build on that too, Liz, I did the same thing when I first started. I did an undergrad at a school where there wasn't any sports nutrition opportunities available for me. And so I had to blank cold call or cold email a couple of people. And the way that I did it was, researching them, looking them up, the dietitians in my area, and sending them an email of, hey, I'm interested in sports dietetics. If you have 15 minutes to talk to me on the phone or something like that, I'd really love to be able to ask you some questions, and just to be able to get them on the phone, ask a couple of good open-ended questions and really start a conversation with them, and then continue to follow up with them was really a good start to like creating that network and starting to make connections with people.
Totally. I have students reach out all the time. They're like, hey, can we do a Zoom? Can I ask you some questions? And I usually say yes to those. And I won't say that's going to be the same way across the board, but like we're people too. We had to get help to get to where we are as well. And so we understand that.
Also saying thank you sometimes, like I don't think I'm ever like, oh, that person didn't say thank you, but I think people will remember you more if you say thank you. Even if it's a 10-minute call, I think people will be like, oh, like they really, valued their time. Because like you're saying, Jessica, like we're so willing to take the call, but we're really busy too. But I think just saying thank you is just another way that someone's going to be kind of like remember your name.
Hi, Jessica. My name is Maria. I had a question about time management. How did you adapt to a fast-paced environment? Did you ever feel overwhelmed or like you maybe didn't have as much of a personal life once you started working in such a, I guess, on the
Part of that question cut off, but I think I got the gist of it. Yeah. So, I think I've always thrived in fast environments. And I think that was helpful just to have foundationally as part of my skill set. As far as the overwhelm, I'll say I'm overwhelmed 90% of the time still. The first like 3 months were a blur, especially because I was coming in during COVID, starting a program, but then also having to start a program while navigating all the complexities of COVID, and that which just made things super challenging. It goes back to, I think, understanding the priorities of the program, and those might not be necessarily your priorities all the time, but the program's priorities, and then looking at those pieces that maybe be less important. So like stocking a fridge is important, but also having food ready and out on time is important, and looking at where can you, I think, where do you need to put more effort? Also, like if you have interns or volunteers working underneath you, like learning to delegate, that's been a whole new world for me because I am not great at delegating things. I'm a perfectionist and a control freak. And so letting people help me has been a challenge, but it's super important that you know where to delegate. I think at the end of the day, most days there's still so much work to be done, but then learning, when do I need to call it quits? Like when do I need to shut off for my own sanity? When is there something that I can deal with tomorrow or something that just isn't as important right now? And that takes, I think, time and experience to understand those dynamics. But yeah, so I think it's really, maybe for you, it's writing it down and kind of ranking things in an order of priorities. And that might change throughout the day. A lot of times I have an idea of things I'm going to get done, and then the day looks completely different, or there's a problem that comes up that I have to then shift focus on to address. And so I think being able to adapt to those, be flexible, and then, resilient. Also, not to take things personal all the time if things don't work out or don't go your way or aren't the way that you wanted it to work out. Learning not to sweat the small stuff. I think I said this on the podcast interview with you, Liz, but I love the quote from Ted Lasso. He talks about being a goldfish. He says how goldfish are the happiest fish in the world because they have a short-term memory, like a memory of like 2 seconds, which I think is really helpful to have that kind of mentality of like, something happened, maybe a coach was unhappy or something like that, but like maybe that wasn't even your problem. They were projecting, and learning to just kind of like take that in stride, not take that personal. But yeah, a lot of days feel overwhelming. The work-life balance, I would say, understand the job before you go into it. Like understand if it's a full-time job, what full-time actually means, because that can mean very different things in different settings. I will say, like, the dietitians that work mostly with Olympic sports and do counseling, their job looks a lot more like a standard full-time job. Right now, I'm working 7 days a week, and some of those days are 7-hour days, some of those days are 14-hour days. And like we talked about in the beginning, I have also a heck of a commute. I've got a daughter. I'm trying to juggle a lot of things, and it does sometimes mean sacrifice. For me, you know, it's a sacrifice I'm willing to make right now while I'm building my career, but it's not always going to be something that I'm going to want to do. I'm not always going to want to work 80 hours a week, you know. So I think it's really kind of understanding you and what's important, what kind of balance you need, and then making sure that you're clear with a role up front of what that's going to look like. There's some boundary setting that should happen, of balancing responsibilities and understanding what to take on and what not to take on. I think experience and time helps you to determine those things.
Hi, Jessica. My name is Chala. I do have a question about the internship process. I'm not sure if you covered this already. I had to join a little late, but what advice do you have for someone before beginning their sports nutrition rotation in the internship process that you wish you knew before yours?
That's a good question. So I love the little, the yellow sports nutrition and handbook manual, something along those lines, if you guys know what I'm talking about. That one's great. I feel like it's super like easy to read and has some really great information in there. There's some great sections in there with you know, macronutrients for specific sports. So studying up on those things, I think it's helpful to go into it. Listening to the Sports RD Snippets podcast, I'll plug that. I think that that's like, you know, you get to hear from so many different sports dietitians in very different worlds. And so it's helpful to kind of understand how different things could be. But yeah, I think it really depends on the rotation that you're going into. Just expect to work hard. I think the other thing is like, so I've got a lot of interns now. Some of them need a little bit more support than others. I think that when you go into the rotation, you need to be prepared to have initiative, be a self-starter, figure things out on your own, be a good problem solver. So whatever that looks like for you, if you don't have those skills, you know, maybe work on developing those a little bit more. And so that you feel prepared for it, but then also soak it in, really, like, you know, try it out and get really, like, picture yourself like, could I work this job? I think it's a great opportunity in your internship rotation to really see all these different types of roles and jobs that you can have, whether it's just as a dietitian or a sports dietitian. So I'd say, like, really, you know, open yourself up to, is this an opportunity that I really like and want to do, and make the most of that time that you have.
Thank you.
I'll just chime in on that advice too. That was really good. But I think it's true, like, I think, like, soak up your experience. And I think too, like, especially going into your dietetic internship, like sports nutrition experience, like, that school, like, you might love it, or you might be like, I don't understand why we're doing these things. And just know, like, you can be a sports dietitian in so many different areas. Like, it doesn't just have to be that one experience that you saw in collegiate. It might be private practices where your niche is, or professional or tactical. So I think too, like, Jessica, I know you said, like, you're not going to work 80 hours a week, you know, for the rest of your life. But, you know, if right now, if that's scaring you right now and that's not something you want to do, it doesn't mean you can't be a sports dietitian. It just means that maybe you're going to work in an outpatient, or there are some collegiate settings that do work 40 hours a week. So I think you were saying that too, Jessica, like, in an interview, really finding out, like, what full-time means. But I think as a dietetic intern, like, really just keeping an open mind and knowing that, you know, this can be the experience of a lifetime, but it's okay if it's not. And that actually helps you realize, like, where you want to spend your time. And that's what the dietetic internship is supposed to be too. You're supposed to figure out, you know, what you kind of want to do for your career. So soak it up for sure, good and bad, but it's all good. It all works out. But I think setting low expectations, you won't be so disappointed, or it could just be amazing. It just depends on, you know, your mindset on that.
Earlier, you mentioned being genuine has worked for you in your practice as far as being able to relate to people. Um, I think a lot of people know you from like your social media presence and how your personality does show through the way that you explain very complex things in a very fun, cool manner. And so, for people who are looking to market themselves more in that space on social media, do you have any advice in that in on I guess on those platforms and ways we can do that?
Yeah, I mean, I have found the effort that I've put into social media has paid off phenomenally for me. And so, that might look different for everybody. Like we're science people. We're not always like the most creative people, right? Like, and that's okay. Find what it is is your special sauce. And I think the more that you're putting stuff out there and you're connecting with other people, like they see your stuff. And if they see your stuff and they see your name stays in their head. And when opportunities come available, they think of you. So if you're really great at creating, simple graphics of just like, these are some pre-workout snacks and here's some little pictures, like that stuff works too. Or if it is, I found like showing my face and actually like being present has been helpful too. Maybe that looks like talking on an IG story, and that may seem intimidating for some people, especially that like don't love being in front of the camera. It gets easier over time. But I think that, there's a unique opportunity for you to connect with people over social media. Like we said at the top of this, I haven't seen other sports dietitians in person for, I think we said 5 years. But I feel like I know so many sports dietitians now that like I never knew, I've never met in person through social media. So it definitely can be a channel where you can elevate yourself and show your work. Also LinkedIn, don't overlook LinkedIn. That's a different way to talk to people. But like I post all my reels and TikToks and stuff on LinkedIn too. And people over there love it. And I'm reaching a different audience than the ones that I'm reaching on Instagram. So whether, I would think some key things to keep in mind. I certainly post some things that can be polarizing at times. I certainly post some things that might be considered risque to certain people, whether that's, booty popping or or the song choice. And so like not everybody's going to love that. If I were going to try to get a job at a school that maybe was a little bit more old school conservative, they might not love me. And that's okay. I feel like that's okay. Like not everybody's going to want to work with me, but I'm not going to want to work with everybody either. And so maybe be mindful of that though. If you're trying to, if you're fresh into the field, maybe you are a little bit cleaner in what you deliver to make sure that you aren't turning anybody off that you might otherwise get excited for working with you. But yeah, finding ways to, I've been able to practice a lot on nutrition education and delivery through social media and making those complex things really concise. So like if I'm reading a research article, I am not the smartest person in the world by any means. And when I read a research article, like I have to really focus on it. Like it hurts my head. And so it helps me to take that really complex information and drill it down to like the key takeaways and application and something that I learned from it. And so I'm learning myself through the things that I'm putting out on social media. And so I think it's a helpful skill, whether that is making videos or making graphics or something, in between. I definitely think that, social media when done appropriately can be great. I will say I've had people reach out for social media opportunities, and this is not to slam anybody because girl, if you're a hot girl, do your thing. But some people will reach out with like a profile that is all bikini pictures. I am not going to respond to you. I am not going to respond to you if you are trying to reach out for me for an internship and all your account is all bikini pictures. Make a different account. Do something else over there. Just be conscious of how you represent yourself. And then also, in the comments, if you're responding to comments, like I get hate comments, like I may choose to, delete, block, not respond, or try to respond in a way that knowing that like other people are going to see how I responded to this person. And if they don't like the way in which I handled it, that's what they're going to think that of me. And so just be conscious of all the ways in which you're engaging online with professionals or potential employers.
Thank you.
Hey, Jessica, thank you for doing this. And thank you to the student committee for doing this. Just kind of listening to your story, making that jump from Indiana to like the LA market. How important was it to be flexible and willing to relocate for a sports RD position for all of us new sports RDs or ones that are trying to break into the field? Do you feel that it is really important to be willing to make that jump?
I think it's a good question. I think it's a personal question too. When I was at certain parts of my life, and I was married, I'm divorced now, but when I was married, like I couldn't just go anywhere. Like my significant other had a job and we weren't going to be able to move. And so I had to look in that geographic region. I think being flexible, if you can and you're willing to, being flexible with where you're at geographically will be super helpful in this job. You know, look at clinical jobs. They're like, you can get a ton at a bunch of hospitals and one zip code, but sports dietitian jobs, we're going to be stretched out all across the country. There's some, virtual opportunities and remote things that are coming available. I see places like IMG Academy that have hired dietitians to do counseling for them from a remote way. So there are going to be opportunities like that. But yeah, I would say, certainly explore what's available in your area. That might be a collegiate position, might be, there might be some pro teams, whether that is like, even like soccer, baseball, other sports that are maybe or hockey that are starting to grow a little bit more with their sports dietitians. But yeah, if you can take a job anywhere, understand what that is going to be like. So if you were to move from Indiana to California, I will tell you the cost of living is insanely different. Housing is insanely different. Commutes are insanely different. So understand if that's going to be something, that's going to be a part of the job that you can handle too. But yeah, if you're geographically flexible, it opens up a little bit more opportunities.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? Don't be shy.
Where are you guys at?
Jessica, I had a question real quick. So a lot of times when we talk about like growing into a new role or like taking on a new job, we talk about imposter syndrome and just sort of the added stress and like feeling like you're not quite sure that you can grow into the role that you need to. Was that something that you experienced, and what would you suggest to new RDs who might be experiencing that?
All the time. Imposter syndrome is so real. But I look at it like this. There are people out there that have no business practicing nutrition that are practicing nutrition, and they're doing it confidently. So if homegirl selling Herbalife can give her nutrition messages confidently, then we as the actual experts with the education and qualification can absolutely own this space. So yeah, I like, it's definitely a real thing. So I think, acknowledging that, I think maybe like, when you do have successes and wins, write those down and remind yourself of, how far you've come and the things that you have achieved. So if you need that little like affirmation that you have that, have a mentor, someone that you can check in with, that can, if you're feeling like you're doubtful, can just be a sounding board for you. I think that's really important. Also, not being afraid to say, I don't know. You're not going to know everything. And I think once you come and try to represent that you do know everything, like people will see right through you. So don't be afraid to one, recognize that you know your stuff, but then when you don't know your stuff, that's okay too. You know how to use your resources. You know how to find the information. And so finding a way to deliver that clearly, like, hey, I don't know, but I'm going to get back to you. Like, hey, I'm not quite sure about this. I want to give you a really good answer. So I'm going to do some research and I'm going to get back to you on that. So that imposter syndrome, it's definitely real, but it has no business. Like, who is she?
Thank you.
That's really good advice, because I think when you're starting out counseling, especially for the first time, like you have a lot of imposter syndrome, but like you don't get that much counseling experience or at all in the dietetic internship, which hopefully will kind of change because I don't really understand that. But it's going to feel uncomfortable, and I think knowing that, but at the same time, if you are the smartest dietitian ever and you don't know how to connect with people, you're not genuine, you can't do your job. So I think knowing, like, a lot of sports dietitians, we kind of have all these like the similar qualities of like being able to relate to your client. Like that, like just listening to your client and meeting them where they are, like you're already helping them before the nutrition education. So I think just being yourself, just being a person that wants to help and genuinely cares, that will take the pressure off you too, to feel like, oh no, I'm this RD and I should know everything. Like it's okay, like Jessica was saying, you don't, but also knowing that like even if you know everything, if you don't have those other things in place, then your message will never, be taken in and utilized. So I think that's something to keep in mind too, is like knowing that like it's okay to not know, and like it's gonna feel uncomfortable for like at least 2 years. So
Yeah, and to add on to that too is a lot of people like know nothing about nutrition. Like I'm working with a lot of like people coming from high school, they know nothing about nutrition. So I don't need to be able to describe to them the Krebs cycle. I need to tell them what to eat before practice and after practice, and like that's simple information. When I first started doing counseling, because I had done it in a clinical realm where like you're in a hospital setting, they're there for 10 minutes, you got to go counsel them on heart disease or cholesterol, ready to go. And you give them everything that you know in 10 minutes time, and they forget it all and they don't really care anyways, or maybe they walk out with that handout. You don't have to do everything in one counseling session. You just need to pick the like lowest hanging fruit, the biggest rocks, whatever it is, and like talk to them about those small little incremental changes. So you don't need to be able to know everything and like recite a textbook to your client. They don't know that information either. So just teaching them little things is impactful.
especially if it's college too, like you don't want to tell them everything because they're going to be so stressed and overwhelmed. So finding that one or two things they can really hone in on is going to be the most beneficial thing anyways, than just like listing all the things they're deficient in or could do better, so yeah, it's a good question. Anyone else?
I guess that kind of like it ties into what she asked. I don't know if it's necessarily like a question, or I probably can formulate into a question, but I think as students, it's so easy to internalize so many things. Like you're working so hard because we all want to be where you are. And we understand that you have to do, things that people may view as a scut work, like the fuel bar, even though you learn so much, and you work so hard because we want to be where you are. And if we mess up, we're afraid that even though you learn from those instances, you're nervous that one mistake can impact your entire, maybe even though it sounds completely unrealistic, you're nervous that that can impact your entire future or the road that you take. So how do you have any advice for students as far as this learning and this growth curve that is where we are now and where we will be? Because I know it's like all a journey and you have to embrace everything that comes along the way, but just so you don't get burnt out or overwhelmed with all the experiences that you have, how can we navigate that?
Sure. Yeah, you're all going to make mistakes. You're going to make a lot of them. It happens. We make mistakes all the time. I think one thing that that I've learned from and that I think other people, like when I really respect, is like owning your mistakes. If you screw up, just own it. Don't make excuses, especially like if it's like you screwed up something, you're talking to a head coach, and you don't give them a bunch of excuses. Like you just, hey, I'm sorry, I'm gonna fix this, whatever, and then get into action mode. And that might be bringing in other people to help you with it and communicating that you're having a problem and that you need some help. Definitely don't be afraid to reach out to people and first of all, understand who those people are that can help you through it. But own your mistakes, take responsibility for them, and then learn from them. Don't repeat the same mistakes over and over again. But things are gonna happen. Like I have food that doesn't show up. I have food that's got things on it that someone's allergic to. And sometimes that means that I lose a little bit of trust with that athlete. And so now I've got to find a way to rebuild that trust. But I have to know, like, hey, it doesn't matter at the end of the day that it came from the kitchen or a restaurant and they messed up. I gave them that food and it's wrong. And so that's my mistake. I have to make that right. That may look different on how you're going to make that right. But yeah, don't be afraid to make mistakes. It's part of learning. It's part of growing. Natural consequences are super important so that we know in our animal brains, like, oh, I don't want to do that again because that really sucked, or I hated the outcome of that, or I know that I disappointed someone, or I know that I let someone down. And so that's all just data and things to learn from. So expect to make mistakes. Don't be afraid of it. Just know how to handle it, and then the next steps to take to solve that and moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think too, like, I think sometimes it looks like, oh, like they're in, like, you're in this role and like everything's perfect, or like there you are. But I think it's not like you keep making mistakes as you go, but you keep making mistakes as you go. And it's not mistakes, it's all experiences. Like, I look back and I'm never like, oh, I made a mistake. I didn't know what I was doing. So it's like, it's something I learned. But you're not like embarrassing yourself like every day, but it doesn't end right when you get your first full-time job. I mean, I've learned so much about myself from year 1 to year 4 that you don't realize. But I mean, just because you're a full-time sports dietitian doesn't mean like it's over. You know, it is amazing, but it's kind of like you're figuring out different situations, and you might embarrass yourself, but it's just a learning experience. Or you might have situations that happen to you and they could feel like crazy experiences, but it's just a part of your path to get wherever you're supposed to be. So I think just embracing whatever happens versus being like afraid of, oh no, I'm responsible for this, I'm going to make a mistake. It's like, wow, my supervisor trusts me with this. I'm going to do everything I can. And if not, like, I have plan B. And, you know, sometimes things happen, but like really own the responsibility versus maybe feeling like, oh no, if I blow this, like I'll never, you know, get that, you know, like recommendation or whatever.
Yeah.
Anyone else? We have 2 minutes left.
I guess this might go for any of the committee on here, but kind of playing upon that, for any of you that have had interns or SNPs or anything like that, what is one thing, maybe attention to detail, communication, that really just stood out to you for giving a recommendation for someone else down the line towards a position?
I will say people that are willing to do the hard work with enthusiasm, willing to do, you know, whether it is like just working the fueling station, but just owning that and being enthusiastic and bringing joy to that, and bringing energy each day. You know, someone that I feel like those are going to be the people that I'm then going to say like, hey, I've got another project and I trust you with doing it, because I know that they're doing the things that I've asked them to do and I need them to do first, and they're doing that well, and they're doing that in a positive way. Then I'm going to feel comfortable giving additional opportunities to that person or writing them a glowing reference.
I have a SNP right now, and I think something that stands out is that she's really proactive. And I think sometimes as a student, you think, and she's not a student, she's obviously like a dietitian SNP fellow, but I think sometimes as a student, you're waiting for your supervisor to like assign you like projects. But, you know, if you're not sure, like reaching out and being like, hey, should I do this? Or like, or going ahead and sending that email to the coaches because it was like the 5th thing to do, but I didn't check up on it, but you went ahead and did it anyways or something. So I think being proactive helps us as supervisors delegate more, because it shows that you can take responsibility. So I think if you're a student, like reaching out and being like, hey, you know, what more can I do, or presenting actual ideas to your supervisor on like how you can help, can be really helpful to show that, you know, you're trustworthy, because, you know, you can get things done.
To add on that as well, I mean, I'm not a full-time dietitian. I'm not a dietitian yet, and I haven't given any recommendations, but I've worked with a lot of other student interns at a couple of different places. And one of the things that stuck out to me that I know that I'm going to look at in the future is someone that's like what's called a servant leader. And you can tell there are some people that you might work with, or some interns or dietitians that, you know, and it's very obvious that they're here because they're here to serve the student athletes and or the professional athletes that they're working with. They're really looking to do anything and everything they can to make sure that that athlete performs at their best. Like, their goal is not themselves, and it's not an individual goal. It's I'm here for this other person, and I'm here to help this person any way that I can. And that's, I think, a really important aspect or trait that someone can have in this field, is just making sure that you're putting the student athlete or the professional athlete first every single time.
Love that. Thanks, Ross. Well, I think our time is up, but Jessica, thank you so much for your time today. It was so awesome having you and such good advice. So thank you.
Thanks, guys.
And we're gonna round of applause. We're gonna we are gonna do these forums once a month. So we have an idea for the next topic. We're thinking of do's and don'ts for interns. But if anyone on this call, we hope you guys all come back for the next one. If you have any ideas of topics that you want to hear about, feel free to email me. It's on the listserv of my email. But feel free to let us know, because we want to make sure that this time is beneficial for you all too. But thank you all so much for coming, and hopefully you took a lot of good things away and can utilize it where you are. All right, cool. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Jessica.